What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, the OG Pyramid Schemer here, and we are back with episode 158 of the video game therapy series. Yeah, I'm still fucking with my hotkeys. Actually, I'm not still fucking with them. They broke. I was switching around keyboards for a while, and for some reason, it is now not passing my keystrokes through OBS or through the display manager to OBS. So that's not really working. So I have to manually start and stop these now, and I don't really edit these videos, obviously, because I don't script them, and there's not, that's kind of the goes against the whole ethos of it. But I've occasionally gone in and cut stuff out if there's like audio problems or something. But by and large, the point of these is I can start and stop recording, and I can finish the whole thing, within an hour. That's why they're always like 52 minutes or something like that, because the theory is that within 1 hour I can sit down and start, and not much to it. Makes them also difficult to do because there is, I think this is present whether or not you would like to acknowledge its existence, but everyone just has those different moods. Like there's people that are, I'll say, unusually cheery or just have a cheery attitude about them. Still have times, and I don't know how chronic these can be. I think, for me, there's times where I'm just kind of chronically antisocial, in the sense where not antisocial. I'm kind of using that word a bit. I don't know, a bit tongue in cheek, only because that makes it seem like I'm shooting up schools, which is not at all what I'm doing. I just don't really feel like talking to people, or people's problems and things bother me, because. And I've noted this before, but a lot of what people spend most of their time like talking, and this is kind of the other issue of why it almost seems more sane to be antisocial nowadays than it does otherwise. But most of people's problems that they discuss, or most of what they talk about, are just complaints that they have in their everyday life. And it could be, small things like, oh, I went to the car store today, and the guy there gave me trouble or something, or went to Walmart and I saw a fat person was was upset or whatever. Of course, that's me. But regardless, it's just people just kind of complaining to the ethos, and I think that has kind of been, I'll again use a kind of controversial word here, normalized to the extent where it seems like you can't really, besides just not talking to somebody, it's taboo to just be like, well, just, hey, stop complaining, or like, hey, I don't care, and that's kind of where I don't know. I think maybe people kind of force themselves into more antisocial tendencies, only because the natural urge would be like, dude, I don't care, or like, I don't really give a fuck, or just get the hint. It's like, I don't want to just talk to you just to complain about your problems, or or each of us taking turns complaining about our problems. Because I guess when I talk to people, I try to one of my worst nightmares is being just someone that all they do is just run around and complain about their problems. And they're like, anytime you ever talk to them, it's always just like, oh, here's some other problems, that not even problems that I'm looking for feedback on, or it's one thing to have like problems and then kind of look for advice. I think that's very normal, but problems just for the sole sake of just having something to talk about. And so it's quiet, let me just complain about something. That is an ethos that is terrifying. Is one that I would, never want to become. But yeah, that's kind of how most people go about their daily lives. Is at least go about their daily, socialities. Like them being social is them just kind of talking and complaining to one another, which isn't really a mode that I would like to be a part of. So, all this to say, sometimes I'm not really feeling in the mood to talk, or there's just really, I feel like I don't have much to say, or there's just not much no interesting ideas coming out of my head. So and sometimes it's when I'm trying to do these. So I'll try to do these even though I don't really feel particularly articulate or thoughtful. That's kind of the whole challenge with this. Is I have to push through and find a way to, at the very worst, just like fill an hour with something. I don't really care, as long as I'm making noise, and someone could call it. I won't even call it. Certainly not art, but call it content, I suppose. That whole idea is disgusting to me. Kind of, it's a very content is a perfect word to sterilize, what would be created as art. And I think there is. I'm not saying that content doesn't exist and everything is art. I guess in some very literal way that is the case, but there is, in my opinion, a marked difference between content and art. I think content, you could say that art is being produced for its own sake, whereas content is produced for the sake of engagement or for the sake of likes or the sake of money or the sake of whatever channel or body is producing said content. Um, so like for example, I wouldn't call news content. I would call it content, not art, because it is not made for the sake of itself. It's made for. Now you can make the argument that there is journalism that you would consider art because it truly is made with the idea, the it itself being the point. But I think most news media, and even if you work in that field, you'd have to agree, is made for the purposes of filling time in the segment or getting viewership or engagement numbers, which, again, by definition, that makes it content and not art. So if you want something to be art and not content, you almost can't really care about not saying it can't have a commercialized aspect, but you cannot emphasize the commercialized aspect of it. Otherwise, it then, kind of in my definition, becomes content and not art. And I think importantly there, all too, is the creator itself is kind of the person that makes that distinction and not like the platform. So, for example, I could, and again, by my definition, I guess, of content versus art, this series is then art because I don't make this for engagement's sake or for any other, and you can make the strong argument and the strong case that it is bad art, which I'd be fine to submit. I don't necessarily think it is. It's not every single one of these videos is my best work. I'm just going to be honest about that. But regardless, it's still made, as the creator of said thing. I'm not making it for views or engagements purpose. That's not the end goal of this thing. So therefore, it could be considered art. But even like on YouTube, they could consider this content, but they're not the ones that make, in my world of defining things, because I'm the one that created this, I get to decide what I call this, and I don't consider it, or I get to decide like the purpose for which I'm making this. And since the purpose of which I'm making this is not for the sole, attraction of likes and comments and money, I suppose, for that matter, by extension. Therefore, it is art and not content. Even if YouTube considers it content or makes a bunch of money off of it. So even like, even a creator that says that they spend a lot of time on the video and that's put a lot of effort into it, and maybe sure it has like some truthful elements to it, but ultimately like the reason it kind of it fails to be art only for the sake of it being a commercialized entity or an entity that was made for the point of commercialization. Now, there's a kind of a harder argument for like YouTube channels that rely on like I guess the advertising of their videos being watched. That's where I think there is some blurring of content and art. Because even like a science channel like Veritasium or something. Like again, like in one conceptualization, you could argue that, well, this channel wouldn't exist and they wouldn't make content, if they didn't now have like kind of an obligation to, fiduciarily, like if they have a financial obligation to make things because they have a bunch of subscribers, they have a whole network, they're employing people like that. By definition, they then have to they need to get views in some ways, but the difficult part is, clearly he started it, the beginner, I guess Derek, I think is the guy's name, the guy from Veritasium, began the channel like just purely for artistic sake, just for exploratory, and it was science, but it was still art in the sense that it was, a video or I guess an artifact of him learning and discovering new things. It certainly began as art, and you could make the argument even piece by piece, on video by video, like what was made almost just is made more so for views than it is for its own sake, versus stuff that is purely made for its own sake that views weren't really important. And because I didn't make the videos and I don't know the intention behind said videos, it's hard. I'm not the one that gets to make that call whether or not something is art or content. But in that case, it's even hard for the Veritasium guy to say either one, because he does have this financial obligation now to his subscribers. And I suppose, on some sense, it is almost like commissioned art because a lot of the subscribers give them money, I assume, through either ads or through Patreon or something, do so willingly, and they do so with the idea that this person's going to make what they think is interesting, and they're interested in seeing what they naturally, would like to create. Which, in that, if that's the line of logic, then it is, I will award I'll award art as a, as the, as what that is, or I'll call it art, I suppose. uh, but I think it's the creator itself that, why did they make this? That could be, you could even consider like commissioned art in some sense isn't really even art. Like commissioned art, someone that pays for an artistic piece, if they have enough of a say in it and it's made, if the artist is thinking more about the commercial ends of their art versus, the art itself, I would then argue that even then, perhaps their art even becomes content. Which that's even maybe a more, I guess, controversial abstraction on that is like, literally a painter that's commissioned to make, to paint a piece or something like that could be considered content and not art. If the painter hadn't, had, I guess, poisoned their intentions, to put it one way. But anyway, I'm talking about crime. I suppose, because the Epstein files are always big, or are still big now, and they probably will be big for probably my whole lifetime, to be honest. I don't really ever see people, giving that a break. I think every few months people say, "Oh, we forgot about this," and isn't this pretty crazy? And I'm not interested in talking about the, any specifics per se. I don't really care. Like I haven't. It wouldn't really surprise anyone to say that I'm not surprised by the delinquent activities that politicians and technology people get themselves into. And it is entertaining in the one sense, and kind of sobering and sad on the other, just given the reality of things. But the one interesting thing I think it does tell me is that it does kind of lead me to believe that the world is kind of is run by what I just consider to be sophisticated criminals. Only because, like, you don't really know the scale of, an operation, not even the scale, but the amount of, I guess, care and detail, the precision at which any operation is being undergone. And there's obvious that, like, the government isn't like perfectly precise, and like obviously there's been some pretty rough government programs and government things that are like not run very well. And it's like, what the fuck is this? You guys thought you're gonna get away with this? Like obvious crime. But I think, given how like the scale of what I'll say is like obvious crime that has occurred, not in this case, but just in general, like politicians in general getting involved in, sex scandals and getting caught, and Facebook messaging people, to vote for them and show me their pussy or something. Again, I don't know what these politicians exactly have have directly been accused of and have done, but I think given how ubiquitous this unsophisticated crime is, I think the people that are really pulling the strings and kind of operating the world, uh, you know, I guess the Jeffrey Epsteins of the case are just kind of smarter, more sophisticated versions of that. So it's like, it's not even like about what is legal or illegal, because I think these sophisticated criminals that I'm calling them are the ones creating the laws in the first place. And they obviously have to create, if you were a sophisticated criminal, you wouldn't just like break the law being dumb. Like, no, okay, first off, you'd like try to find nuance in the law. You'd hire a good lawyer. And you'd be like, okay, well, this is interpreting, you could interpret this, passage. And we'll do a financial criminal just as an example, because it's straightforward. But they first interpret the law for themselves. Like, okay, well, what is this? What could I actually get away with, given that this is the word of the law? So, like, all right, once they've stretched, the actual literal word of the law, then it's like, all right, how could we change this law? Or like, is there a specific place in which I could be to this law wouldn't apply? Okay, what are the other workarounds? So it's just kind of figuring out clever workarounds to then, we'll even say break the law. And most of the time, I'm sure it's for, I guess personal financial gain, but it could be really for anything. I guess power in this case. But again, the example I'm running with is a financial crime. So then they figure out the plays or the exact things they have to do to then, kind of avoid the penalties of this crime. Or if they do get caught, then it's like, okay, well, legally I'm not, I followed everything, I followed my plan in the sense that legally I'm now not, even if I did get caught, I can still funnel away my money, or I can put it into trust, and I can still get it after I come out of jail or something, or I'm friends with the judge now, so I'm not going to worry about that. So he's going to give me a light sentence or something. So just kind of pulling the levers that you can internally, and we still don't know. Like, we love to think as soon as we catch one criminal, it's like, oh, that'll show him. Like, now there's never going to be another Jeffrey Epstein again. And I've even said this before. Like, even with someone as horrible as like Hitler, and again, I have to get my have to get my H bomb reference in. People like assume that we're gonna, like, we've stomped it all out. It's like, and even, I guess people are, know that there are still Nazis running around today, but even then, like, people kind of assume that we know what crime and what evil and what criminals, even what like financial criminals would look like and what they do. And we've even seen like that change. It used to be kind of like a slick Wall Street guy that knows everybody, and then it was like kind of the autistic tech loser nerd who plays World of Warcraft. Sam Bankman-Fried type. Now that's kind of an archetype of a financial criminal. These kind of archetypes and how these people look and how they work are still evolved day to day. It's like they're still, if you think they're not still evolving or still present, then I think you're out of your mind. you know, um, Either way, like, you'd figure out, just again, sophisticated ways to do your biddings in a way that may not be even illegal, right? And I think if anyone were to really investigate and understand what you're doing, they would obviously come to the conclusion that it's immoral or that you shouldn't be doing it. But that's not really, the argument isn't whether or not it's moral or not. The argument is whether or not I'm going to get in trouble for doing it, which again is like two different things. And I think, as a as I say, a law-abiding citizen, you kind of want to assume that people are always acting not in the spirit of the law, not in the actual word of the law, but people go even further than just avoiding the spirit of the law. They avoid the actual word of the law through again, hiring good lawyers and interpreting things, but then also all the political levers that they can. It's like, okay, fine, if we need to get this guy to be amendable to our ends, I'm sure it isn't always. It's not like a comic book movie where it's like, we're gonna hold his, kidnap his wife and hold his kids for ransom. It doesn't really work like that. So it just kind of leads me to conclude that the world is still being run by, whatever, a deep state, or just run by people, but or different groups or factions of the government or something. But the way to classify them would be sophisticated criminals, because the unsophisticated criminals were just kind of slowly capturing. Of course they're gonna live their life because they're gonna be 60 by the time we actually catch on to their scheme. But nonetheless, if you think that the currently there was only one Jeffrey Epstein, there's only one financier doing things in the gray areas, so to speak. I think you're out of your mind. I think that's probably more of the definition than it is the rule. Is that there's people operating in that gray space, um, you know. But yeah. Anyway, we move on to something else here. Um, this is kind of a more like a personal conception of things, and this is I've tried to really beat this into my own head, only because I think it's important that I realize this, whether I can or not, a different thing. But most things that you do, or like make yourself do or have to do because of work or whatever obligations that are that force you to do the things that you do. A lot of them, more often than not, the thing itself is really only as hard as you think it is going to be. So even something like, I'll say like running a mile. If you're not like morbidly obese, if you're just in moderate okay shape, running a mile is just not that hard. Like, objectively, it's not even that far. Maybe it's anywhere from, because if you're really fast, if you haven't run at all, I'm assuming anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes. But it's and it doesn't require any complicated skills. Like, I'm sure that everyone who's in okay shape can run or jog or at least power walk something. But the idea is, like, the reason running a mile to many people evokes like this like visceral reaction is because you think it is going to be hard. Like, you kind of remember the times that you were running and you're like, oh, well, that sucks. I don't want I don't want to do that. That sounds awful. Kind of like the repetitive, your feet hurt, then your heart is beating out of your chest, and then it's like you're winded, and maybe it's too hot or too cold outside or some problem. Like, you're kind of, the the moment someone says, "Oh, let's go run a mile," like that, all those images and feelings pop into your head. But ultimately, like it's not that hard. Like even like the mechanics of it, and even like the task itself, you even know. I think it's on some level that it isn't really that difficult, and that you could do it if you wanted to. But then quickly after that is the rationalizations of why you don't need to do that, why there's no purpose in running a mile, or why it's inefficient. Right? This would be another way to kind of, you know, you know, uh, like weasel yourself, talk yourself out of doing something. As you go, well, I want to go for strength. I don't want to go for cardio speed. So like I need to, if I'm going to do something for my goals, I'm going to do something strength related because I want to be a strong guy, not a fast guy. It's like fine, whatever, but like the way it is now is you don't do anything. So like, you're not the important thing isn't trying to optimize, what your routine is. If your current routine is nothing, this is optimization. Whereas doing anything is better than doing nothing. So like I think being, good being the enemy of perfect or perfect being the enemy of good or even great for that matter, um, is the real problem there, not necessarily that, you're doing an inefficient thing. Really, this is true for anything, even stuff that isn't necessarily physical. So like let's say like getting good at chess. Again, it like or sorry, I'm sorry, I'm not being a chess grandmaster. I'm just saying get like learn it. Fine, we'll even say learning the game of chess. Like suppose you don't know how to play chess, you don't even know what chess is. Learning the game of chess, the rules, and just can you play a game without breaking the rules? Like do you know how to play and how to win? Uh, that is not that hard. You can learn that in probably under an hour, I suppose, if you're really paying attention. But people that haven't played chess are like, oh, it's too complicated. It's like let's play a simpler game, or they just kind of put off and they find different ways. And you can see this in your daily life whenever somebody is tasked with doing or just really just doing anything they haven't done before or isn't easy to them. Um, is there is kind of this like automatic like, oh my god, that sounds hard. And anything can sound hard if you tell yourself how hard it is or you think through all the difficult parts of it. And I think this is kind of a two-sided problem with like the way the human mind works is that we do kind of live and love solving these problems. We have evolved and we love, not to say we love, but we naturally are geared towards figuring out problems, and we do that through piecemeal thinking, one step at a time for a problem, and then kind of developing a solution and iterations. We're kind of used to this problem solving ability, but what that does is anytime we hear something where it's like, okay, the problem is we need to get in shape or something, then it's like, okay, what can we do to get in shape? Then it's, oh, we run a mile. And immediately our problem solving mind is like, okay, well, here are the problems that's going to arise once we start running a mile. Like our heart rate's going to go up, or we're going to have pain, we're going to have muscular pain and cardiovascular strain for, 10 minutes or something like that. And, again, the problem solving part of us is like, damn, that sounds a lot. That sounds very difficult. Like, what are some other problems I have to think about? Like, because there's always going to be unintended problems that I'm not really thinking of now that are going to come up later. And it's like, oh, well, you could possibly, trip on your shoelace. You could be wet outside. You could get mugged by somebody. Like, there's any number of these like things that you can kind of convince yourself of problems. But before you know it, you've talked yourself out of doing anything because all you've doing has been thinking about all these potential problems and the actual like hard parts of it. Whereas I think if you actually like think about in the grand scheme of things, getting up 10 minutes earlier, getting up 30 minutes earlier to run a mile is not hard. Like it's just not. If someone was making you do it, and if you did it for every day for a week, I promise you by day 7 you'd be like, well, this really isn't that bad. like there's probably a lot more torturous things I can think of. So this isn't really. I guess there's no lesson with this, but the lesson being that I just don't listen too closely to how hard you think something is going to be. A lot of times, even understanding new concepts or moving somewhere, it all sounds hard because we're good at conceptualizing potential barriers to our solutions. But don't kid yourself on a lot of this stuff. Some of this stuff is not fucking hard. It's easy. It's just how hard you think it's going to be. And like just that the barrier is a self-imposed barrier, which is true of a lot of things. Not even just doing tasks, but even physiologically, there's a lot more neurological barriers there are to strength training or getting stronger or more athletic than there is, literal biological or physiological limitations. Um, so I guess that being lesson. Don't take yourself too seriously, or listen to your advice too much, or agree with how difficult you think something is, because you'd probably, and this isn't to say that things are always easier than they think. I think there's a fine line. But if you find, people that do things and are open to new experiences, I suppose the good way to personify this person would be like the autotelic personality. So the person that is a very self-directed and self-motivated and is very confident learning everything, they are aware that, yeah, if you actually get it into the weeds of things, most things are actually more difficult than they seem to be. But if you are somebody that struggles to do things at all and just have more of a passive, or a complainer's attitude, I guess, to put it bluntly, um, things aren't that hard. Especially what you think is going to be that hard is not really that hard. But I'm not saying that everything is easier than you think. Because if you are a doer, I suppose if you can call yourself that person, you know that things do tend to get more complicated as you dig into them. But by the time that you have committed yourself to some problem or some solution, you'll kind of buzz through all these, the small hard things about something, and I don't know. It's all in your head, I suppose. The task is, and always has been, psychological. Um, let me move on to something else here. I guess I'll actually check my phone for the first time, because usually I do actually put some of these things on my phone sometimes. It's not always on my computer because I'm out and about thinking about crap. um, yeah, I just thought this was funny. Uh, my dream is to be my dream is to be an autobiographer's nightmare, meaning that you would, this person or this life would just be something that is just full of these nonsensical twists and turns. It's like they might make sense in hindsight, but they are they just seem ridiculous. Where it's like, oh, this person, because there's people that have lived those lives like that, where it's like it's almost, you almost envy how like bold that they are. They're like, oh, he went off to Kansas to go work in the circus, and you're like, what the fuck? And then after a month, he threw it all away and then moved to Canada to then start hunting moose. And we're like, how do you get yourself into that? And then then it's another thing. There's just jump after jump from like crazy wild career to other wild career. Um, I think it'd be funny to conceptualize that as a autobiographer as a nightmare. But anyway, I suppose that on a similar vein, I was thinking about just like what what motivates people, and I think one motivation, especially in the just in the realm of, I suppose you can call this self-actualization, would be the I guess category of self-identity, is just like wanting to be truly like yourself, and kind of, I talked about this a few episodes ago about like specking out and people kind of specking into what their final thing is, like who they truly are, like what they're really good at, kind of really polishing their strengths and leaning into their, being, again, truly who they are. And I think people kind of reach this stage, or aspire to reach this stage in adulthood. But with the caveat, or at least that I was thinking, is that finding this like true, who truly am I, who is my person. I think you can only really find that through suffering of some kind. This suffering need not be like physical torture or some kind of psychological or addiction or something really that bad. But it could even just be the struggle of like a monotonous everyday life. Like there needs to be some kind of, I'll even say, existential struggle. This existential struggle could be being stuck in a concentration camp. Like sometimes that is how people have really achieved this like final kind of permanent sense of selfhood, where it's like, I know I am me because this, I lived through this part and I had to be all of myself or something. It's just kind of like you have specced out knowing that you've hit the rock bottom. And again, not to use a too much of a trite example here, but like David Goggins famously like pretty much beat the shit out of himself like 100 different times. And I think, on one level you could look at it as masochistic or just silly, or you could look at it from like the physiological level, like what's he training for? Why is he doing this? This is not smart. But I think he articulates it best in saying that it was simply like a battle against himself. And most people, their battle isn't, it doesn't have to be that hard. It's not like you have to go run, 100 miles without training or whatever he did. But regardless, I think it does require like an agreement and acceptance of you kind of going into the dark, and the dark being like the dark part of yourself, the dark part of your life, or the difficult parts, and that part will come find you if you don't look for it. And I think it's better to kind of accept it with open arms, or just being ready for it, and not anticipation, or because that almost seems like you're being optimistic, like waiting for bad or torturous times to come find you, but at the very least, just with a sense of grace and acceptance, and not trying to fight it off. But I think people think that they'll be themselves, or they'll be all of themselves, or they'll finally be the person that they are once things have, once they've gotten to a good part in life, once they've kind of achieved like balance, financial balance, or just they've met the right person or something, or they have the right family or whatever. But I think the opposite is actually true. Like people will truly find themselves and to fall into their habits when things are at their worst, when like you've lost everything and you're kind of at the bottom. That's kind of when you'll finally kind of come into your own, and I don't know, kind of finally discover who you are, is through that process of of suffering. And the suffering again could be purely, it could be psychological, it could just be like depression or something more, it could be more physical, it could be you randomly signing up for a marathon or something. I don't know, I think just people need to truly find yourself. You need to find it. You're not going to find it at a grocery store, you being happy, or at the fair, or whatever. You're going to find it probably at in a bad place. And it's okay to be, I guess, wary of that, but don't be scared, I guess. Is the it's my only real takeaway from that, advice wise. And if I sounds like I'm ever giving anyone advice here, I'm only ever giving like myself advice with these, only because I think there's enough wisdom really out there, like the wisdom that we know from our ancestors and all the great Greek, like all this knowledge is out there, and is also spread around all the time. Like people say these things constantly. They always have these quips of wisdom, but no matter how many times people say, wise things, like all I know is that I know nothing. Nobody seems to really internalize and kind of embrace that as like an actual philosophy on how to live. They just kind of cast it off as like kind of an old guy. Well, he didn't have the internet. Like he didn't know. Socrates didn't have these things. And I think part of the reason why it's considered wisdom and why I consider it important is that it does not matter what time period. These things are independent of time. So like just the acceptance of ignorance, again, even living in the most non-ignorant time possible, which really is true of any time that someone was alive. Like technically every moment is the most non-ignorant moment collectively, throughout all history. But especially now, like even in the era of science, it's even more important to kind of have intellectual humility for topics. And I think people conflate the power of science with the certainty of it, and then they kind of miss that. They miss that very important part of the ancient wisdom. But anyway, I don't know. I forgot where I got off track there, but anyway, yeah, I had this idea for like a video game that I thought would be cool. Making my own video game is one of those things that I think most dudes, at least most people, most I guess Gen Z people that grew up around the internet, they'll have their own dreams of one day making their own video game. And of course, me being no different. That being said, I don't really have a great. It's not like I have some stuck idea, some great idea for it, or even know what kind of game it's going to be. I think I probably would gravitate towards some kind of FPS, or some kind of. I prefer this interface to games. I think this is the most immersive, where it's like you are the character. The third person character, when it's over the shoulder, I think is better, but when it's like up above the head and it's too far away, it feels too impersonal, and I don't feel like I'm connected to my character. Whereas like in this game, I literally am the character, so it doesn't. There's no loss there. So I think if I had to pick a type of game, it would probably be first person shooter. Second choice would probably be like a platformer of some kind, probably a 3D platformer with like a low over the shoulder view. Either way, the idea for this game, which again is could go through several different iterations. Also, just while I talk about it, because part of me is explaining things out loud, is going, "Oh, maybe this is a good idea," or "Oh, I'd give up on that. I don't. This is stupid." Um, but it would be, I would want to call it like the game of life, because I think it would be all of human history or just humanity, kind of like human history that is built into kind of one, lifetime of the game. So I guess to put it in perspective, this game, I would like it to be I want like high replayability, meaning that in the same way like Minecraft has high replayability, you could play the game of Minecraft and not really get bored. Um, in my ideal scenario, there would be even like speedrunners that would try to speedrun life, literally speedrun life. And then that wouldn't only be the joke. I think the game would probably have to be called something different than life. I thought about like the Latin for life, which I think is like Vita, Vitae, or Vita, um, which I think might be cool, just because it's like, I don't know, it's life, but it's Latin, and a lot of our, roots are from Latin. A lot of the common languages, originate from Latin. But it would be essentially all of human history in one play of a video game. So like to set stage for the times here, like the first, suppose, let's say for example that I designed the game to be, I'll say, I don't know, 30 hours of, or I'll just say 10 hours of gameplay, and it could be 100. 10 is arbitrary. But out of those 10 hours, like 2 out of 10 of those, the first 2 hours would be like caveman, and the mechanics of the caveman era would be different. Who knows what it might, the actual mechanics of it might be, but it might be like hunting for food and survival in that way. Kind of a very outdoorsy, almost like Minecraft, but just the very beginning of it where you kind of feel naked and exposed, and there's things after you have to kind of get food, and survival is kind of the key. And that's going to be a theme throughout. Is it like throughout? In some ways, again, I'm kind of with any creation, you want to put a bit of yourself into the creation. So there's going to be philosophical implications with all of the with the entirety of this game. That's just because that's by design. So the philosophy of this caveman part of the game would obviously just be to survive. That would be kind of the initial the initial thought. Then maybe like we'll say hours 3, 4, and 5 or something like that. Those might be jumping around from like first civilization, so like Egyptian pyramid almost. Probably be that, something in that. And maybe we could even pick like you could play life literally in different geographic locations. So maybe you could play starting from northern Africa, or play from the western United States. But either way, the first 2 hours would be kind of caveman era. Then it would be like kind of pyramid, early, very early, we'll say like BC, 200 BC, 300 BC. Maybe you could play in Rome and also Africa or something. And then, hours 5 and 6, that might be like 17, 1800s, kind of maybe you're in Middle America for one of those. Maybe the other ones you're in, Asia for something else. And again, the mechanics throughout each different point in life changes. So like early caveman to survive, then it's like, kind of fighting with early industry and like early physics, kind of that being, the part of it. Again, I haven't really figured out what the gimmicks would be. I'm sure, again, the gimmick for survival might be similar to Minecraft in the early parts of the game, but the game would mutate over time to the initial point where life would kind of end where it currently is. So it's like in modern era. And I'm not saying you'd be fighting off like, floating phones and, like Ozempic ads or something, in the modern life, but there would be some way where you'd be like a person trying to do something in that time period. And I don't exactly know what what the objective might be. And it may not always be like you reliving historical events. I'm not saying that you would be like, on the fucking Mayflower as a pilgrim over the seas. Like you might just be like on a boat somewhere. And that might be like, that part of the game. And your idea is just kind of like to min-max or to like kind of win the part on the boat. And I haven't decided whether or not like the game should be something you could like. It's meant for time, where it's like a very time based game, where the kind of a it is very much towards speedrunners. Um, but another part of me kind of wants to make it more open ended. Ideally, it'd be a game. It'd be similar to Minecraft in the sense that it is highly speedrunnable, yet also highly playable for a theoretically infinite number of hours. It's not like Minecraft has any kind of hard limit where things get boring after a while, or that you've done all the achievements. It does kind of have a extremely open end at the end part of the game. But either way, I thought it'd be interesting, just kind of moving through the different eras of time. I think games do play with that aspect a lot, and even they play even throughout. I'm even. There's probably games that play out through the same gimmick where they're playing out throughout, a pattern of time. But I think, that would be a very nice structure for a game that I would make. And I don't know. I just had a. It was just kind of a shower idea I had, and felt like sharing. But yeah, a game of life, or Vita, retie, or something like that. But whatever. Anyway, let me move on to something else here. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I guess there's another. I'll finally dive into my I guess techno anarchist rantings. One thing that the internet did do as a result of its I guess just how the protocol, just how it works, and by its nature, I suppose, is it removed accountability from the equation entirely, where nobody seems to be accountable or want to be accountable for everything. There's always, and part of this I also blame on a legal system, or a justice system almost, is just too lax, in the sense that, not the sense that it doesn't punish people hard enough, but it doesn't punish enough people for enough things. And part of that is also like an enforcement issue, and also a legislation issue, not necessarily about just the justice system, but the enforcement, the legislation itself, and the enforcement of said legislation are both factors that make this worse. But even then, it's also, there's some sympathy, only because the internet was such a out of left field technology. Who really knew how to regulate something before it exists? So you can't really blame them that much. But so I guess the real blame, if I'm going to actually blame people here, are just the individuals themselves, which I think is the by and large, it is the safest and probably most accurate group of people to blame in any scenario, would be the people themselves. Like, they're generally at fault in some way. Like, individuals, even like like if I say the problem of drug use, like, sure, I can blame the manufacturers of drugs. I can blame China for importing a bunch of people. I could blame the judges that don't put drug users away into rehabilitation centers. I could blame the rehab centers for not being strong enough, or to that don't use the most up to date drugs or something, or who even knows what the fuck. I could blame everybody, but ultimately, I think the most accurate person to blame is the people themselves taking drugs. And not to say that it's okay to or it's never okay to take drugs, or that you deserve everything if you take drugs once in your life. But ultimately, I think the right people to blame when if we're talking about drug users are the drug users. Like, that's the real problem. The problem isn't, like, don't make the judge who didn't put a drug user in jail before they hurt themselves or someone else. Don't make them the real villain here. If they make the wrong call on some case, in some instance, the villain here is the drug user. Like, that is the problem. It's not the judge or whatever, or really anyone else. Be their parents or something, but it's still their fault. I think that should be the focus. Regardless, the internet, because of its anonymous nature, removed accountability from things. So there isn't really any way of holding individuals accountable. And not to say that there should be, but I think it put that concept into our culture, where it's not, where I guess as long as you make it out, or as long as you didn't get hit with something, it kind of makes things okay. It excuses a lack of accountability, or it makes a lack of accountability the assumption. Which is not to say that I'm people should stand behind everything that they do. Or there's no reason to ever do anything anonymously. I think the internet there's many reasons to be anonymous on the internet, but ultimately it has caused a lack of accountability as kind of the default mode of things, where it's no one can be held accountable for everything because, well, it's just some person on the internet did that. It's the internet's fault that happened. Or the internet's responsible, or the platforms of the internet, are responsible. Which again, if you're gonna blame Facebook for your daughter, being a hoe or something, it's like the problem is your daughter's a hoe, or your son is whatever, bullying people. Like that is the problem. Don't make the villain out to be Facebook per se. Like obviously we can point the fingers at Facebook, and I hate Facebook too. So I agree with you on that part. But the problem is, your daughter's a whore. That's a problem. It has nothing to do with the technology itself. Don't forget who's really accountable here. Is it's you making the decisions. Or I guess this case it might be you raising your daughter in that way, not necessarily Facebook, itself. Um, but yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I think I had a better concept of that at a different point. Um, yeah, let's see here. Um, hmm. Let me actually. I'm gonna list none of these ideas are speaking to me. Um, hmm. Yeah, this is. I guess it's just another topic, just in general. Just kind of a general life advice topic about balanced. And it's hard because I do think that there are so many advantages to being imbalanced. Just as a person. So, and I mean, this concept is very apparent in video games. Like, if you've ever played a video game where there's essentially like branching trees, where it's like, okay, if you choose the wizard path or something, you'll have all these advantages and, um, you know, whatever. And actually, a better example might be like Pokemon, where it's like, sure, you could have six guys and equally level them up, have them all at level 20, just like the the enemy trainers do, and have each of them at all their equal levels. Or, the real fast way to go about playing the game is to just have one guy and level up the ever loving shit out of him. And essentially being very unbalanced. So it's like, I don't care if you have six guys level 20. I have one guy level 42, and you're going to get demolished. So and so it's even seeing stuff like that in video games, and then thinking about like our real lives, like the real world, where it's like you're trying to balance, being sociable, having technical skills, having enough money. Like you're kind of trying to balance all these different things, and I think it's tempting, in many cases, to be like, well, fuck the social skills. I'm just gonna like work on making more money. I'm just gonna max out like my amount of money that I'm gonna make, or I'm gonna max out like the amount of time I spend having fun. I don't give a fuck about the money or the my physical body, or like I don't. Yeah, physical body's another thing. It's like, well, I don't have to be while I'm making all this money and I'm having all this fun, why do I have to go to the gym? It's like, I don't care. Yeah, I'm fat, but like whatever. Um, Whereas I think the true way to live is to be balanced. I think the balanced man is the ideal man and woman, whatever. But I think the imbalanced man does have advantages that are unfortunately very advantageous in today's climate. Like even skills, for example. Like I think the balanced skill guys, like, all right, well, I have skills across many different disciplines. I could fix a fence, I could fix a car, all just the simple fixes, nothing too crazy. Versus like the guy who's like a Volkswagen engine expert. Um, in terms of their career, the Volkswagen engine expert probably has better prospects because, they could probably get a really great job working at, Volkswagen or whatever. Whereas the balanced man probably is more helpful to have around the house. And it's going to be more helpful in his day to day. Like he's not going to, unless he only drives Volkswagens and, every engine in his every mechanical piece of machinery in his house is also a Volkswagen part. I think it doesn't really help him to just know, to only know the Volkswagen engine. He's kind of missing all that balance. So I think I don't know, there's just a lot of temptations and drawings away from being balanced. So I think not a lot of, but there's a non-zero portion of my time is trying to spend focused and thinking about balance and not letting the very seductive imbalances take over. Meaning that I could just kind of sink all the way into one thing and just do one thing, or kind of ignore one part of my life, but it is, again, there's kind of an obligation or a duty in some sense to not ignore all the different dimensions. So if you haven't been social in a while, or you haven't worked out in a while or something, you need to achieve that balance in order to have true harmony and happiness. But yeah, I think I'll just probably wrap it up there. It's a little over the place today. Again, as always, I rarely am immediately cogent on these. It usually takes a while to get into the flow of things. But anyway, thanks for watching. Peace out, and I will see you guys in the next one.